They tell me life is beautiful.
So when I read your book Unlocked, which is beautifully perched on your shelf behind you, one thing I found really helpful was you talking about using the phrase kind of screen time is unhelpful. So instead of just using this blanket term screen time, what should we be focused on instead that's going to help us maybe parent better, teach better, look after our children online better?
I think that involves leaning into the conversation a little bit, and the answer to that can be very individual sometimes. So the problem that I've got with screen time as a concept, generally in the discussions that we have about it, but also in the research that we do as well, is that it's everything, right? This is screen time now. Um, I don't get the sense that we're actually worried about screen time in and of itself. I think if you're arguing that literally, definitionally, screens are the problem, then it's something to do with that screen-based technology that you need to come up with a theory about why that's having an impact. And nobody thinks that, right? Everybody's worried about TikTok or Roblox or the
Mm.
specific use cases, the content on screens and the context. But screen time is something easy to get our heads around. From a scientific perspective, screen time is relatively easy to measure. You just ask people how much time have you spent on screens, or you can be slightly more specific about that and go, how much time did you spend on your smartphone yesterday, or how much time did you spend on Blue Sky yesterday, or whatever your social media platform of interest is. But that data is deceptive in many ways. So very often, most of the time, if not all of the time, I think in the research, you ask those sorts of questions. How much time did you spend on whatever? And people will give you a number. Whether that number has any bearing on reality or not is a different question, because what you're not actually asking people is objectively, how much time did you spend on this thing? You're asking them, how much time did you think you spent
Mm.
on social media or whatever it is? And that's I know it's a bit of a niche, nerdy thing to say, but that's a really important difference that we've not really properly acknowledged in the research literature. And there are some studies that are trying to do this. There are some studies that have shown that, if you ask people how much time do they spend on their phones, and you ask them measures of their mental health, but then you also get objective measures of screen time. So you go into their phones and go into the screen time app or whatever and get an actual number out of that. The correlations that you get are different. So when you look at those, what we call subjective measures, those self-report measures where you're answering it yourself, they can be 4 times the magnitude of correlations with the more objective measures, which kind of lends itself to this idea that, if we feel as though we're not having a good time on our screens, that kind of gets reported in the research data that we produce. We'll report spending more time, not deliberately. We do think we're spending more time and worse
Mm.
outcomes. So it's kind of for reasons like that and other things that I think screen time is not a useful concept in these sorts of spaces. And I think from a parental perspective, I often think about this in the context of food as an analogy.
Mm.
That there are some foods that we really worry about, right? And we don't want to give our kids lots of sugar or lots of high fat sorts of foods, but we don't ask, what's the effect of foods on our kids'
Yeah.
weight, right? The answer there is, well, it depends, right? It depends
Mm.
on the food, but it also depends on the context in which you eat food, how often you eat it, in what sort of company, what the education around diet is, all of those sorts of things. And it's kind of like, well, it's almost patronizing to use that as a comparator, right? Because obviously it feels that way, but there are parallels in the sorts of conversations that we have, around,
Mm.
we might have real concerns around fizzy drinks, and whether our kids have those or not. I've got two very young children. We have started going to parties where fizzy drinks are available, and I'm like, I'm not
Yeah.
really sure about this yet. I didn't need to think about when I want to introduce them to this, because I know once that floodgate's open, fizzy
Yeah.
drinks are a thing that we need to think about all the time. But when we come to thinking about real serious concerns with kids, we might focus on energy drinks. These are things that really we don't want kids to be having for all sorts of good reasons. And I think the screen time debate is kind of like that. We keep getting stuck at the level of what effect does screen time have on us or having our kids, when actually we're worried about social media, understandably a bit more, but actually even then it's very specific parts or mechanisms within social media that we really want to get to grips with and maybe even legislate or regulate.
And it gets back to this point that it's really nuanced, isn't it?
Yeah.
So even the analogy with like fizzy drinks, like from a well-being perspective, a child going to a party with their friends, socializing, having fun, all of those positive well-being benefits is probably going to surpass the negative, glass of fizzy lemonade. Do you see what I mean? So like on balance, in that context, a glass of lemonade at a party is likely to not do that much harm because of all the benefits of being with friends and having fun and socializing, etc.
Absolutely. And you see this in the data as well for screen time. In terms of screen time research, you see that in the data. There've been some studies which kind of call this the Goldilocks effect, in a sense, where if you look at different types of screen time in children and young people and well-being levels, you kind of get, for very low levels of screen time, you get lowish levels of well-being, and then they go up. So some screen time increases well-being, and then it kind of reaches a peak. And sometimes in the news, that peak has been the focus, and that's not the point. It doesn't really matter where that peak is. But afterwards, you see reductions in well-being. So I think I've seen some news articles where they say things like 4 hours of screen time is the tipping point between good and bad well-being, and that's not the right way to look at that data. The way to think about it is in understanding how children interact with screens. So you get different curves for different types of screen time, but generally you get the same thing across the board, which is that if you've got no screen time, then you're kind of locked out. If we just even take TV, if you don't watch any TV, you're almost locked out of conversations with your friends in the playground. You don't know what Bluey is or K-pop Demon Hunters or whatever it is that's the thing. And, you can pick up on those conversations quickly, but, you're not part of that sort of shared social experience. And you can maybe understand why then, and for older kids, that's more kind of socialization around social media. And you can understand why then that's related to lower levels of well-being. And at the same time, you can see why spending hours and hours and hours and hours a day on screens is also bad for well-being, because it lends itself to increases in coming across potentially harmful content, having bad interactions, negative interactions, not doing other things, all of those sorts of things. So it's kind of like everything in moderation in a way.
Yeah.
They tell me life is beautiful.